Sarah Martinez, a dedicated high school English teacher in Denver, Colorado, discovers that Principal Thompson has been embezzling funds meant for student scholarships and programs. When she tries to report it, he threatens her job and forces her to stay silent. As Sarah struggles with her conscience, she watches her students suffer from lack of resources, while the principal continues his corrupt practices. The story builds to a dramatic climax during the annual school assembly, where her students unexpectedly rally to her defense, forcing the truth into the open and proving that sometimes doing the right thing requires courage from an entire community. By 3 p.m., the autumn wind swept across the courtyard of Lincoln High School, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of marching band practice. Sarah Martinez pulled her cardigan tighter as she hurried across the parking lot, her arms full of essays that needed grading before tomorrow's classes. At 34, she had been teaching English at Lincoln for 8 years, and despite the challenges that came with working in an underfunded public school, she genuinely loved her job. The late October sky was painted in shades of gray, threatening rain that would likely arrive before evening. Sarah quickened her pace, her heels clicking against the asphalt as she approached the main building. She had stayed late to help Marcus Williams, one of her juniors, with his college application essay. The boy had real talent, but his family couldn't afford a tutor, and Sarah refused to let any of her students fall through the cracks. As she reached for the handle of the faculty entrance, she realized she had forgotten her keys in her classroom. Sighing, Sarah walked around to the main entrance, hoping the custodial staff hadn't locked up yet. The hallways were dimly lit, creating long shadows that stretched across the polished linoleum floors. Her footsteps echoed in the empty corridors as she made her way toward the administrative wing. That's when she heard the voices. Sarah paused near the corner leading to the principal's office, recognizing the deep baritone of Principal Robert Thompson. She was about to announce her presence when something in his tone made her hesitate. There was an urgency, almost a desperation, that she had never heard before. "I need another week," Thompson was saying. "The board meeting isn't until the 15th. I can have everything back in place by then." Sarah frowned, pressing herself closer to the wall. She shouldn't be eavesdropping, but something felt wrong. Principal Thompson had always been somewhat distant, but he ran the school efficiently, or so she had thought. "Bob, this is the 3rd time you've asked for an extension," came another voice, one Sarah recognized as belonging to David Chen, the district's financial advisor who occasionally visited Lincoln. "The scholarship fund audit is routine, but when we can't account for $60,000, it's not missing," Thompson interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "I borrowed it, temporarily. My son's medical bills from the accident last year nearly bankrupted us. Insurance didn't cover everything, and the specialists..." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. $60,000 from the scholarship fund, money that was supposed to help students like Marcus afford college. Her hand instinctively tightened around her bag, the essays inside crinkling softly. "Bob, I understand your situation is difficult." Chen's voice was gentler now. "But you're talking about embezzlement. If the state finds out during their surprise audit next month, they won't find out if you give me more time." Thompson's desperation was palpable now. "I've got a second mortgage lined up. I can replace every penny before anyone knows it's gone. These kids, they depend on this school. If I go down, the whole place falls apart. You know what happens to schools that lose their principals to scandal." Sarah felt sick. She thought about Marcus, about Elena Rodriguez in her AP class, who was hoping for the Martinez Scholarship, named after a teacher who had died in service to the school. She thought about all the programs that had been mysteriously cut this year: the after-school tutoring, the drama club, the student newspaper. Now she understood why. "I can't be part of this, Bob," Chen said firmly. "I have to file my report by Monday. If you want to try to resolve this, you need to speak with the board directly. Maybe they'll work out a payment plan, but I can't." The sound of a door slamming made Sarah jump. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, moving away from her. She waited, heart pounding, until she heard the outer door of the building close. Then carefully, she peered around the corner. The administrative area was empty, but she could see light still coming from under Principal Thompson's door. She stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, trying to process what she had just heard: the scholarship fund, their students' futures, had been stolen by the very person who was supposed to protect their interests. Sarah's phone buzzed, startling her. A text from her husband, Miguel. "Dinner's ready. Kids asking where you are." She realized she had been standing in the hallway for over 20 minutes, frozen by the weight of what she had discovered. As she finally moved toward her classroom to retrieve her keys, Sarah's mind raced. She had to do something, but what? Thompson had been principal for 12 years. He had connections throughout the district, relationships with school board members, influence that a single teacher like her could never match. Yet how could she stay silent when students were being robbed of their chances at higher education? The rain had started by the time Sarah reached her car, fat droplets splashing against her windshield as she sat in the driver's seat, staring at the dark windows of Lincoln High. The building that had been her second home for 8 years suddenly felt foreign, tainted by the knowledge she now carried. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Miguel's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, where are you? Emma's asking if you can help her with her math homework, and Jake wants to show you his science project." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of her own children, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Jake. What kind of example would she be setting if she stayed silent about this? But what kind of example would she be setting if she spoke up and lost her job, leaving her family financially unstable? "I'm on my way home," she said quietly, starting the engine. As she drove through the darkening streets of Denver, past the modest houses and apartment complexes where most of her students lived, Sarah realized that her life had just become infinitely more complicated. The comfortable routine of lesson plans and grading papers had been shattered by a conversation she was never meant to hear. The rain fell harder, and Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter, knowing that tomorrow would bring decisions she wasn't ready to make. The sleepless night had left Sarah with dark circles under her eyes and a knot in her stomach that no amount of coffee could dissolve. She had spent hours staring at the ceiling, Miguel's gentle snoring beside her, a stark contrast to the chaos in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus Williams' hopeful face as he talked about his dreams of studying journalism at the University of Colorado. She thought about Elena Rodriguez, whose single mother worked double shifts to support her family, counting on that scholarship to make college possible. The morning sun filtered through the classroom windows as Sarah arranged papers on her desk, her hands trembling slightly. Students began filing in for first period, their chatter and laughter a painful reminder of their trust in the system that was failing them. She forced a smile as they settled into their seats, but her mind was elsewhere. "Mrs. Martinez, you okay?" asked Jessica Parker, a perceptive senior who often stayed after class to discuss the novels they were reading. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I'm fine, Jessica. Just a long night grading papers," Sarah lied, opening her copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The irony wasn't lost on her, teaching about moral courage while struggling with her own ethical dilemma. The morning classes passed in a blur. Sarah found herself distracted, stumbling over words she had taught hundreds of times before. During her prep period, she sat alone in her classroom, staring at the phone on her desk. She had looked up the school district's ethics hotline 3 times, but couldn't bring herself to dial. The knock on her door came just after lunch. Principal Thompson stood in the doorway, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something harder to read. At 52, he was an imposing man, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of authoritative presence that made both students and teachers defer to him. "Sarah, could I speak with you for a moment?" Her mouth went dry. "Of course, Mr. Thompson, please. Come in." He closed the door behind him and took a seat across from her desk. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Sarah wondered if her face betrayed the knowledge she carried, if somehow he could see the guilt and uncertainty written in her expression. "I understand you were here quite late yesterday," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah's heart began to race. "Yes, I was helping Marcus Williams with his college essay. You know how important it is for our students to have that extra support." "Indeed." Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "The custodial staff mentioned they saw you near the administrative wing around 6:30. I was wondering if you needed anything from the office." The question hung in the air between them. Sarah realized this was her moment. She could admit what she had heard, confront him directly about the missing scholarship funds. but looking at his cold, calculating expression, she felt her courage evaporate. "I had forgotten my keys," she said quietly. "I was just trying to find a way back to my classroom." Thompson nodded slowly. "I see. Sarah, you've been here for 8 years. You're a valued member of our faculty. I'd hate to see your career complicated by any misunderstandings." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah felt her palms grow damp. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Thompson." He stood up, smoothing his tie. "Lincoln High is like a family, don't you think? And families protect each other. They understand that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. They know when to speak up and when to stay quiet." Sarah's throat felt tight. "The greater good. This school serves over 1,500 students, Sarah, many of them from disadvantaged backgrounds. Students who need stability, continuity. They need their teachers, their programs, their sense of security. A scandal, even a misunderstanding that might be blown out of proportion, could destroy all of that. Funding could be cut, teachers could lose their jobs, students could be transferred to inferior schools." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I trust you understand what I'm saying. You're a smart woman, Sarah. You know that sometimes the right thing to do isn't always the obvious thing." After he left, Sarah sat frozen in her chair. The message had been clear. Stay quiet or face the consequences. She thought about her mortgage, about Emma's orthodontist bills, about Jake's plans to join the school's robotics team next year. She thought about her colleagues, Mrs. Patterson, who was 3 years from retirement, or Mr. Rodriguez, who had just started his first teaching job and was already struggling to make ends meet. But then she thought about Marcus, who had stayed after school 3 days this week to work on his essay, his eyes bright with possibility as he talked about exposing corruption in local government through investigative journalism. She thought about Elena, who tutored younger students in Spanish to earn money for her family while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. These students deserved better. The final bell rang, and Sarah mechanically gathered her things. As she walked through the hallways, she noticed details that had escaped her before. The peeling paint in the science wing, the outdated textbooks students carried, the broken water fountain that had been temporarily out of order for 3 months. How much of this was due to genuine budget constraints, and how much was because $60,000 was missing from accounts meant to improve student opportunities? That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table while Miguel helped the kids with homework. She had pulled up the district's website on her laptop, the ethics hotline number glowing on the screen. Her finger hovered over her phone's keypad. "Mom, can you help me with this math problem?" Emma's voice broke through her thoughts. Sarah looked at her daughter's earnest face, then at Jake, who was carefully constructing a model volcano for his science project. These were her priorities, her responsibilities. But what about her students? What about Marcus and Elena and the dozens of others who were counting on adults to do the right thing? "Sure, sweetheart," she said, closing the laptop. "Let me see what you're working on." But as she helped Emma with fractions, Sarah's mind was calculating different numbers. The cost of her silence measured against the price her students would pay for her cowardice. The equation seemed impossible to solve, and the deadline for making a decision was approaching faster than she was ready to face. 2 weeks had passed since Thompson's veiled threat, and Sarah felt like she was drowning in her own silence. Every morning, she looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a woman who had compromised her principles to protect her comfort. The weight of her knowledge pressed down on her shoulders as she walked through the halls of Lincoln High, avoiding eye contact with her students and colleagues. The November air had turned bitter, matching Sarah's mood as she supervised lunch duty in the cafeteria. She watched her students navigate the crowded space, their animated conversations about weekend plans and upcoming tests a painful reminder of their innocence. They trusted the adults in their lives to advocate for them, to protect their futures. "Mrs. Martinez." Marcus Williams approached her table, his usually bright expression clouded with worry. "Could I talk to you about something?" Sarah's stomach lurched. "Of course, Marcus. What's on your mind?" He glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "It's about the Martinez scholarship. The deadline was supposed to be last Friday, but when I went to submit my application, Mrs. Henderson in the office said the program had been suspended indefinitely. She couldn't tell me why." The cafeteria noise seemed to fade as Sarah stared at Marcus. She had known this moment would come. when her silence would have real, tangible consequences for the students she cared about. Suspended? Yeah, and it's not just that one. Elena heard that 3 other scholarship programs have been put on hold too. The counselors are telling seniors to look for outside funding, but you know how competitive those are. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Mrs. Martinez, my mom's already working 2 jobs to help with my college applications. Without that scholarship money, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah knew Marcus's story. Raised by a single mother who cleaned offices at night and stocked shelves during the day, dreaming of being the first in his family to graduate from college, the Martinez Scholarship was his best shot at affording the University of Colorado's journalism program. I'll look into it, Sarah heard herself saying, though she knew exactly what she would find, or rather, what she wouldn't find. The money was gone, likely sitting in some account, paying for Principal Thompson's son's medical bills. Thank you, Mrs. Martinez, I knew you'd help. Marcus's grateful smile felt like a knife twisting in her chest. That afternoon, Sarah found herself standing outside the district office downtown, her car keys still in her hand. She had driven here without conscious thought, pulled by a growing sense of urgency that had been building for days. Through the glass doors, she could see the reception desk, the elevators that would take her to the superintendent's office, the path toward doing what she knew was right, but she couldn't move. Her phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. Emma's school called. She needs to be picked up. Stomach flu. Can you get her? Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the moments slip away. She turned back to her car, another opportunity for courage lost to the mundane responsibilities of daily life. The next morning brought news that shattered Sarah's fragile equilibrium. Elena Rodriguez wasn't in first period, which was unusual. The girl had perfect attendance. During her prep period, Sarah learned from the guidance counselor that Elena had withdrawn from Lincoln High. Her mother took a second job in Colorado Springs, Mrs. Foster explained, shaking her head sadly. Elena wanted to finish her senior year here, but they couldn't afford the gas money for the daily commute. She'll have to complete her degree at Springs High. Sarah felt sick. Elena had been her most promising AP student, destined for great things if she could just get the financial support she needed. Now she was gone, another casualty of a system that had failed her. What about her scholarship applications? Sarah asked weakly. She'll have to start over at the new school. Different programs, different deadlines. It's a real shame. She had such a strong application for the Martinez Fund before it was suspended. That evening, Sarah sat in her empty classroom long after the final bell, staring at Elena's vacant desk. The girl's absence felt like an accusation, a reminder of what her silence had cost. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through Elena's recent essays, brilliant analyses of social justice themes in literature that demonstrated a mind capable of changing the world, if given the chance. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted her thoughts. Principal Thompson appeared in her doorway, his expression unreadable. Working late again, Sarah? She looked up at him, seeing not the authority figure she had once respected, but a man who had stolen from children to solve his own problems. Elena Rodriguez transferred today. Yes, I heard. Family circumstances, I understand. These things happen. Do they? Sarah's voice was sharper than she intended. Or do they happen because the support systems these kids depend on are being redirected? Thompson stepped into the classroom, closing the door behind him. Sarah, we've had this conversation. I thought we understood each other. We do. She stood up, facing him across the rows of empty desks. I understand that you stole $60,000 from the scholarship fund. I understand that Marcus Williams might not go to college because of your choices. I understand that Elena Rodriguez is gone because the safety net she was counting on doesn't exist anymore. Thompson's face hardened. Be very careful, Sarah. You're making serious accusations without proof. I heard you talking to David Chen. I know about the medical bills, the second mortgage, all of it. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. Then Thompson's expression shifted to something almost pleading. My son almost died, Sarah. The experimental treatment wasn't covered by insurance. What would you have done? Let your child suffer when you had access to funds that could save him? I would have found another way. I wouldn't have stolen from students. And if there was no other way, if it was your Emma or Jake lying in that hospital bed, The question hit her like a physical blow. Sarah thought of her own children, of the lengths she would go to protect them. But even as she imagined that impossible choice, she knew she couldn't justify taking from students like Marcus and Elena. "There's always another way," she said quietly. Thompson straightened his tie, his vulnerable moment passing. "Well, thankfully, you'll never have to make that choice. But you do have a choice to make now, Sarah. Think carefully about which path serves everyone's best interests." After he left, Sarah remained in her classroom until the building fell completely silent. She thought about Elena, starting over at a new school. She thought about Marcus, watching his dreams slip away. She thought about all the students who would come after them, unknowing victims of a system corrupted by the very person meant to protect it. The annual Lincoln High School Achievement Assembly was scheduled for the first Friday in December, and Sarah had never dreaded an event more. As she sat in the faculty section of the packed auditorium, watching over 1,000 students file into their seats, she felt like she was suffocating under the weight of her secret. The irony wasn't lost on her. They were here to celebrate academic excellence, while the very funds meant to reward that excellence had been stolen. Principal Thompson took the stage with his usual confident stride, the microphone amplifying his voice as it reached every corner of the auditorium. "Good morning, Lincoln Lions. Today we celebrate not just your achievements, but the bright futures that await you." Sarah closed her eyes, unable to watch as he spoke about opportunities and dreams while knowing the truth. In the 3 weeks since Elena's departure, 2 more scholarship programs had been quietly suspended. The college counselors were overwhelmed, trying to help seniors find alternative funding while not understanding why their usual resources had vanished. "Before we begin recognizing our outstanding students," Thompson continued, "I want to address some rumors that have been circulating about our scholarship programs. Due to a temporary administrative review, some funding has been delayed. I want to assure you that we are working diligently to resolve these issues." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. Even now, faced with 1,500 students and their families, he was lying with practiced ease. She looked out at the sea of young faces, many of them students she taught, all of them trusting the adult on stage to have their best interests at heart. "Now, let's begin with our academic honors," Thompson announced. "First, I'd like to recognize our National Merit semi-finalists." As names were called and students walked across the stage, Sarah's mind drifted to a conversation she'd had with Marcus just yesterday. He had been accepted to 3 universities, but couldn't afford to attend any of them without scholarship money. His mother had taken on a 3rd job, cleaning offices on weekends, but it still wouldn't be enough. "Mrs. Martinez," Sarah startled, realizing that Mr. Rodriguez, the young history teacher sitting beside her, was speaking to her. "I'm sorry, what?" "Thompson just called your name. You're supposed to present the writing awards." Panic flooded through her as she realized she had completely missed her cue. Standing on unsteady legs, she made her way to the stage, acutely aware of over 1,000 pairs of eyes watching her. Thompson handed her the list of winners, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Our English department has consistently produced some of the finest writers in the district," she began, her voice barely steady. She looked out at the audience, seeing Marcus in the 3rd row, his expression hopeful despite everything. Behind him sat Mrs. Williams, who had taken time off from work to watch her son receive recognition for his essay on social justice. The first award goes to Marcus Williams for his outstanding piece on investigative journalism and the importance of truth in democracy. As Marcus walked onto the stage, his essay's words echoed in Sarah's mind. "The greatest threat to justice isn't the presence of evil, but the silence of good people who choose comfort over courage." Standing there, watching this remarkable young man accept an award while his future hung in the balance because of stolen funds, something inside Sarah finally snapped. The careful walls she had built around her conscience crumbled all at once. "Actually," she said into the microphone, her voice suddenly clear and strong, "before Marcus accepts this award, I think his essay deserves to be heard." Thompson stepped forward, alarm evident in his expression. "Sarah, that's not—" Marcus wrote about the responsibility of journalists to expose corruption, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's dangerous. Her voice carried across the silent auditorium. He wrote about how staying silent in the face of wrongdoing makes us complicit in that wrong. "Mrs. Martinez," Thompson's voice was low, warning. But Sarah was beyond warnings now, looking out at her students, at Marcus, at the empty seat where Elena should have been sitting, at all the faces filled with hope and trust. She found her courage at last. "I need to tell you something," she said to the packed auditorium. "The reason your scholarship programs have been suspended isn't due to an administrative review. It's because $60,000 meant for your futures has been stolen from the scholarship fund." A collective gasp rose from the audience. Thompson lunged for the microphone, but Sarah stepped away from him, her voice growing stronger. "I've stayed silent for too long, watching students like Elena Rodriguez leave our school because the support they were promised have vanished. Watching students like Marcus face impossible choices because the adults they trusted failed them." "Sarah, stop this immediately!" Thompson hissed. But his words were picked up by the microphone system. The auditorium erupted. Students began standing up, their voices rising in confusion and anger. "What happened to Elena?" someone shouted. "Where's our scholarship money?" called another. Then, from the third row, Marcus Williams stood up, his young voice cut through the chaos. "Mrs. Martinez taught us that integrity means doing the right thing even when it's hard. She's showing us what that looks like." One by one, other students began standing. First Jessica Parker, then students from Sarah's AP class, then others who had heard the rumors and were putting pieces together. "We support Mrs. Martinez," someone called out, and soon it became a chant that filled the auditorium. "Martinez! Martinez! Martinez!" The sound was overwhelming. Hundreds of young voices united in support of their teacher, who had finally chosen courage over comfort. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she looked out at these remarkable students, her students, who were teaching her about bravery. Security guards moved toward the stage, but the chanting only grew louder. Parents in the audience began pulling out phones, recording the scene. Sarah could see school board members in the front row, speaking urgently into their cell phones. Principal Thompson grabbed her arm. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his composure finally cracking. "This school, your career, everything." Sarah looked at him calmly. "No," she said, pulling away. "I've finally done what I should have done weeks ago." As the auditorium continued to echo with students chanting her name, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The consequences would come. She knew that. There would be investigations, interviews, probably the end of her career at Lincoln High. But looking out at Marcus, at all her students standing in support of truth, she knew she had finally made the right choice. The truth was out, and it had been spoken not in a whisper of fear, but in the unified voices of the students she had been trying to protect all along.